The room falls silent. Every eye in the chamber is locked onto Justice Clarence Thomas, whose sharp gaze cuts through the air like a blade. The tension in the room is so thick, it feels like it might suffocate the air itself. Thomas, sitting high above, his decades of experience practically dripping from his posture, leans forward, his voice smooth yet menacing. "Congresswoman Crockett, forgive me," he begins, the words dripping with condescension. "But perhaps you should familiarize yourself with the legal nuances of the very bill you're trying to defend. It seems a little beyond your scope, doesn't it?" The audience collectively holds its breath. The cameras flash, capturing the look on Crockett's face, a mix of disbelief and quiet fury. The question, laced with arrogance, is a public jab at her ability, an attempt to dismiss her and diminish her voice in front of the entire nation. He's not just questioning her knowledge, he's questioning her legitimacy. The courtroom goes cold, the weight of the moment sinking into the hearts of those watching. Crockett's hands rest firmly on the desk before her. Her knuckles are white, but it's not from fear. It's from the focused determination of someone who's been underestimated their whole life. She's been through worse. She's battled harder fights. And this? This is just another one to win. For a moment, the silence stretches long, thick with the weight of Thomas's challenge. The world waits, breathless. What will she do? Will she cower, shrink under the weight of his authority, or will she stand her ground? Her eyes flash with the fire of a leader who has nothing left to lose. She inhales deeply, her voice steady, unwavering, as she leans into the microphone. "You see, Justice Thomas," she begins, her tone cool but sharp, "the law is for the people, not just for those who hide behind it to shield their egos. And I've read every word. So let me tell you exactly why you're wrong." The room shifts. There's a collective shift in the air. Thomas's face twitches. Crockett's response, sharp as a blade, pierces the moment of tension. The cameras zoom in, capturing the stunned silence that follows her words. Thomas, the man who has ruled the room for decades, is now frozen. But little did Thomas know, Crockett's response would leave him speechless, and the world watching would never forget what happened next. Justice Clarence Thomas has been a fixture in American legal history for decades. Appointed to the Supreme Court in 1991, he quickly became the embodiment of conservative judicial philosophy. His opinions, often rigid and uncompromising, have shaped the course of American law, from landmark decisions on affirmative action to controversial rulings on gun rights and the power of the states. For nearly 30 years, Thomas has stood as an unshakable pillar of the conservative legal establishment. His name is synonymous with power, influence, and a judicial philosophy that has driven the direction of the nation's highest court. For many, Thomas represents the old guard, the unwavering defenders of a system that's been in place for generations. A system where the powerful remain untouchable, where the voices of those fighting for justice and equity are too often dismissed. His legacy is one of control, of keeping the balance of power firmly in the hands of the few. Then there's Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, a name that's quickly becoming a force to be reckoned with. Elected to the U.S. House of Representatives just a few years ago, Crockett is the very embodiment of the changing tide in American politics. She's young, ambitious, and unapologetically progressive, with a fierce commitment to justice and a relentless drive to dismantle the old systems that have long perpetuated inequality. As a black woman from Dallas, she's witnessed firsthand the struggles of marginalized communities, and she carries those experiences with her every day as she fights to represent the people who have been left behind by the political establishment. Crockett is different, not just in terms of her identity but in her approach to politics. She refuses to bow to the establishment, to cater to the old ways of doing things. Instead, she challenges the status quo at every turn, speaking truth to power with a clarity that few dare to match. Her rise has been meteoric, fueled by her unrelenting belief in justice and her fierce commitment to amplifying the voices of those who've been silenced for too long. She's a rising star in a political world that's slowly, but surely, being reshaped by younger, more diverse leaders, a new wave of lawmakers who are tired of the old system that has left so many behind. So when Crockett faces off with Thomas, it's about more than just a disagreement over the specifics of a piece of legislation. It's about the future of the country, the future of its legal framework, and the future of its democracy. The battle unfolding before the cameras is the culmination of a deeper struggle, a clash of ideologies, a clash of generations, a clash of power. Thomas represents a system that has long held dominion over the political and legal landscape. He's the establishment, a man whose influence is etched into the very foundations of the country's legal system. Crockett, on the other hand, represents a new era, an era where the voices of the unheard are finally given a seat at the table, where the law is no longer a tool of the powerful but a beacon of justice for all. She is the voice of the people who have been ignored for too long. And so, when these two figures, so diametrically opposed in both ideology and experience, come together in this high-stakes moment, it's not just a battle of wits. It's the battle for respect, for authority, and for the future of American legal and political life. The room may be small, but the stakes are as big as they come. But as the stakes continue to rise, no one could have predicted what was about to unfold. Justice Clarence Thomas is a figure whose very name evokes a mix of reverence and disdain. He's one of the most consequential, and divisive, justices in the history of the U.S. Supreme Court. His rise to the highest court was anything but smooth. It was marred by controversy, a bitter confirmation process, and a political landscape that wasn't prepared for what he would bring. And yet, over the years, Thomas has cemented his place as an unquestioned authority, a force that has shaped American law with the weight of his unyielding conservatism. Born in 1948 in Pin Point, Georgia, a small, segregated town, Thomas's early life was defined by hardship. Raised by his grandfather after his parents' divorce, he experienced the brutal realities of racism and poverty firsthand. Yet, despite these struggles, Thomas rose to become one of the most powerful legal minds in the country, a man who would go on to shape the very fabric of American jurisprudence. His confirmation hearing in 1991 was a spectacle that would haunt him for years. Thomas, nominated by President George H. W. Bush to replace Thurgood Marshall, faced intense scrutiny and opposition. The hearings, which featured testimony from Anita Hill accusing him of sexual harassment, became a national flashpoint. The bitter political divide and the public's polarized reaction set the stage for Thomas's tenure on the court. He was confirmed by a narrow margin, but the damage had been done. His reputation was tarnished before he'd even had a chance to rule on a single case. His political enemies viewed him as a man who had skirted through the confirmation process, and his supporters saw him as a hero who stood strong against the forces trying to discredit him. Thomas's legal philosophy is rooted in a strict interpretation of the Constitution, one that is often aligned with traditional conservative values. He's been an outspoken critic of affirmative action, advocating for a colorblind interpretation of the law. His decisions on abortion, voting rights, and gun control have further solidified his place as a pillar of the conservative establishment. But what has made him so polarizing is not just his conservative views, but his staunch refusal to engage with the political or social movements that many believe are necessary to address the inequalities in American society. Unlike some of his fellow justices, Thomas has been unapologetically resistant to the pressures of public opinion. He rarely speaks during oral arguments, choosing instead to write long, detailed opinions that leave little room for compromise or nuance. In fact, his silence on the bench has become one of his defining characteristics, a tacit refusal to participate in the public spectacle of the court. His opinions, often staunchly conservative, reflect a man who believes deeply in his interpretation of the law and shows little concern for the consequences his decisions have on marginalized communities. This unwavering commitment to his philosophy has made him a hero to conservative circles and a villain to progressives. He has been a consistent voice on the court for the right-wing agenda, pushing for the rollback of civil rights protections, restricting abortion access, and protecting the interests of the wealthy and powerful. His stance on issues like voting rights and campaign finance has been criticized as out of touch with the realities faced by ordinary Americans, particularly those from minority communities. And yet, he remains largely untouchable, insulated from the political winds that change with every election cycle. For years, Thomas has held his ground, weathering the storms of criticism with a stoic, almost robotic composure. He doesn't need to court public opinion because he has the power of his position to back him up. His rulings have shaped the nation's legal landscape, often to the detriment of the very groups that could use a voice on the Supreme Court. To his critics, he's become the embodiment of everything that's wrong with the judicial system, a man who is disconnected from the struggles of the everyday American, a man whose rigid views and conservative ideology blind him to the needs of the people he's meant to serve. And yet, despite the sharp criticisms, he remains unshaken. He's untouchable, a figure who has survived scandals, media firestorms, and political backlash to maintain his place on the court. His ability to remain untouched by public opinion has allowed him to continue advancing his conservative agenda unchecked, making him an intimidating force for anyone who dares challenge the status quo. For someone like Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, a rising star in a new generation of political leaders, Thomas represents everything she's fighting against. He is the symbol of the entrenched power structures that have kept communities of color, immigrants, and the disenfranchised at a disadvantage. He's the man who, despite his background, has used his position to reinforce systems of inequality. In Crockett's eyes, Thomas is more than just a judge. He is the embodiment of the old guard, the kind of power that dismisses the struggles of the people, that silences those who speak out, and that clings to a vision of America that no longer fits the reality of the nation's diverse and evolving landscape. But what Thomas didn't know was that this time, things would not go according to plan. Jasmine Crockett's journey to Congress wasn't supposed to happen. At least, that's what the establishment thought. Born into a working-class family in Dallas, Texas, Crockett's early life was defined by struggle, but it was also shaped by a fierce determination to carve out a future where she could make a difference. From a young age, she watched her mother work multiple jobs to support the family, barely making ends meet. Crockett grew up in a community where opportunity was scarce, but the spirit of resilience was abundant. It was here, in the heart of a city that has long been marked by racial and economic inequality, that she found her calling. Her childhood wasn't easy. She remembers the long nights her family spent worrying about bills, the constant weight of economic insecurity hanging over them like a dark cloud. But it was also a time of immense pride in her roots. As a black woman, Crockett was taught that the world would never hand her anything, but that didn't mean she couldn't demand it. Her grandmother, who had marched in civil rights protests, instilled in her a deep sense of justice. "You have to fight for your rights, Jasmine," she would often say. "No one's going to give them to you. You have to take them." Crockett took that advice to heart. By the time she reached college, she had already begun to make waves. A first-generation student at the University of Pennsylvania, she studied political science, determined to understand the systems that had kept people like her family from succeeding. She learned quickly that the laws and policies shaping her world were designed with one goal in mind: to protect the powerful, to silence the marginalized, and to ensure that those who were already at the top stayed there. And she was done being silent. Graduating with honors, Crockett decided to go to law school at the prestigious Southern Methodist University, where her reputation as a fierce advocate for justice quickly grew. But it wasn't just the textbooks that shaped her education, it was her experiences as a community organizer. She spent her weekends helping families fight eviction, lobbying for better healthcare access, and working to provide legal representation for low-income people of color who had no voice in the system. She came to realize that the system wasn't just flawed, it was broken. And it was up to people like her to fix it. Her legal career took off quickly, but Crockett soon found that her passion for justice couldn't be contained by a courtroom. She became involved in local politics, fighting for the policies that would directly benefit the communities she came from. Crockett worked tirelessly to improve education, increase access to affordable housing, and reform the criminal justice system, issues that she knew were far too often ignored by the political elite. She was determined to bring a fresh, bold voice to the table, a voice that could no longer be drowned out by the old guard. When she decided to run for Congress, many thought she was too young, too inexperienced, too radical. But Crockett saw things differently. She knew that in order to change the system, you had to challenge it head-on. Her campaign wasn't just about pushing policies, it was about giving people who had long been excluded from political power a seat at the table. She spoke to those who had been forgotten, to those who had been left behind by both Republicans and Democrats. She didn't just promise change, she embodied it. In 2020, after a hard-fought battle, Crockett was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives. She was 38 years old, a political newcomer with no experience in Washington, but she had something that the political establishment didn't: the trust of the people, and the unwavering belief that her voice mattered. She entered Congress with the same fire that had fueled her rise from poverty, ready to take on the forces that had long dominated the country's political landscape. It wasn't just about passing bills, it was about confronting the powers that had kept the status quo intact for far too long. In her first year in office, Crockett didn't waste time. She immediately went to work on legislation aimed at reducing the wealth gap, expanding voting rights, and dismantling the systems of inequality that had been baked into American society for centuries. She fought tooth and nail for criminal justice reform, pushing for measures that would address the disproportionate impact of the system on communities of color. She was a thorn in the side of the establishment, unafraid to challenge both Democrats and Republicans when they stood in the way of progress. Her reputation as a fierce advocate for the marginalized grew, but so did the opposition. The old guard, particularly figures like Justice Clarence Thomas, looked at her as a threat. She wasn't afraid to speak truth to power, to stand up for what was right, no matter the cost. And that's why, when she was asked to testify in front of a congressional hearing that would challenge the very fabric of the country's legal system, she knew this was her moment. This was more than just a chance to make a statement. This was her opportunity to push back against the same powers that had shaped Thomas's career, to show that the future was not about preserving the status quo but about breaking free from it. She wasn't there to play by the rules. She wasn't there to wait her turn. Crockett had already spent her entire life fighting for justice, and now, with the eyes of the nation upon her, she was ready to take on the very man who had helped build the systems that had oppressed so many for so long. With the stage set, it was clear, the moment of truth was almost here, and both Thomas and Crockett had everything on the line. The room is electric, each word from Justice Clarence Thomas a calculated attempt to diminish Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. His cold stare cuts through the air as he leans forward, eyes narrowing, poised to strike again. He's done this before, in countless hearings, against countless opponents. He knows how to break them, how to make them squirm under his intense scrutiny. But this time, something's different. He can feel it in the air, the way Crockett stands unshaken, the way her eyes meet his with no fear, no hesitation. Congresswoman Crockett, Thomas begins, his voice slow and deliberate, his words laced with contempt. You seem to be speaking in very broad terms. But can you really grasp the intricacies of the law you're advocating for? I wonder if you fully understand the consequences of what you're asking for. Legal precedent is not something one simply challenges without truly comprehending its implications. There it is, the jab. The subtle suggestion that Crockett doesn't have the legal acumen to engage in a meaningful debate with someone of his stature. His words hang in the air, a calculated strike aimed to rattle her, to put her on the defensive. The audience shifts uncomfortably, but Crockett remains still, her hands resting calmly on the desk in front of her, her face an impassive mask. She's heard it all before. The dismissals. The doubts. The underestimation. But she isn't here to be intimidated. She's here to show why she belongs. Her voice cuts through the silence, cool and composed. Justice Thomas, with all due respect, you're talking about precedent as if it's an immovable truth, but we both know that the law isn't static. It evolves. It's supposed to evolve. If we're only bound to what has been done before, how will we ever move forward? How will we ever address the injustices that still plague this country? The room goes still. There's an almost imperceptible shift in the air. Crockett's words hang with the weight of truth, and for a moment, it seems as though even Thomas feels it. But he doesn't back down. No, he's not used to backing down. The old guard never does. His next words come sharper, more biting. You're underestimating the weight of judicial philosophy, Congresswoman. You're reducing it to a simple game of ideals. The law isn't a playground for empty rhetoric. It's about stability. It's about knowing where the lines are drawn and sticking to them, even when the winds of politics blow hard against us. Crockett doesn't flinch. She simply raises an eyebrow, the calm before the storm. Justice Thomas, she says again, her voice still steady, the law may be about stability, but it's also about justice. And justice isn't about maintaining the status quo, it's about ensuring fairness for everyone, not just the privileged few. You've spent decades upholding a system that favors the powerful, but it's time for a change. It's time to give the people who've been left behind a seat at the table. A murmur ripples through the room. Thomas pauses, his expression hardening. He's not used to being challenged like this, especially not with such clarity and conviction. The audience can feel it, the tension is building, and the balance of power is shifting. He's no longer the unchallenged titan in the room. For the first time, someone is standing up to him, and that person isn't backing down. Respectfully, Congresswoman, Thomas sneers, trying to regain control, you're speaking in broad strokes again. But you haven't addressed the core issue, the interpretation of the law. Are you suggesting that the Constitution itself is flawed? That the foundation of this country needs to be rewritten because a few people haven't been treated fairly? It's clear now that Thomas is trying to provoke her, to paint her as naive or radical. His voice rises slightly, the arrogance creeping back in. But Crockett isn't rattled. She's been preparing for this moment her whole life. The fiery intensity that's been building in her all these years, that desire to push back against the systems of injustice, surges to the surface. The calm exterior she's maintained cracks just enough to reveal the force of her passion. Not at all, she counters, her voice still steady, but now filled with an undeniable strength. I'm not suggesting we tear down the Constitution, but I am saying it's time to reinterpret it. It's time to acknowledge that our laws were written by a specific group of people, with specific interests, at a very specific time. And that doesn't work for everyone today. For too long, we've allowed those laws to prop up systems of inequality. What I'm asking for isn't radical, it's necessary. Her words land like a punch to the gut. Thomas's jaw tightens, his eyes narrowing even further, but Crockett doesn't stop. The audience can feel the shift in the room. The balance of power is no longer in Thomas's favor, it's slipping, slowly but surely, into Crockett's hands. Thomas tries once more to assert his dominance. And you, Congresswoman, are you prepared to take full responsibility for the consequences of what you're asking? Do you truly understand the ripple effects that could devastate the very fabric of our society? But Crockett, undeterred, leans forward, her voice quiet but forceful. The real devastation, Justice Thomas, is the system that's already in place. The real devastation is the millions of people who have had to suffer under the weight of laws that were never made with them in mind. I'm not asking for change for the sake of change, I'm asking for change because it's the only way we can create a truly just society. The room goes deathly silent. The stakes are clear now. It's no longer just about a political disagreement, it's a battle for respect, a battle for justice, a battle for the future of this country. And Thomas, once so sure of his dominance, now looks momentarily uncertain. And then, in a moment that stunned everyone, Crockett delivered a response that would leave Thomas speechless. The tension in the room is so thick it feels like you could cut it with a knife. Justice Thomas, his face a mask of fury and disbelief, has spent the last few minutes trying to press Crockett into submission. His words have been sharp, biting, but each one has been met with calm, collected responses that only serve to sharpen Crockett's position. It's clear now that she's not just here to challenge him, she's here to change the game. The audience is on edge, leaning forward, hanging on every word. This isn't just a political debate anymore. This is a battle for the soul of the nation, a battle for who gets to define justice, who gets to decide the future of America's legal system. Thomas, frustrated, tries one last time to land a blow. You speak of justice, Congresswoman, but what you fail to grasp is that the law is not a tool for your personal crusade. It's about fairness, consistency. It's about protecting the system that's been in place for over 200 years. His words hang in the air, his tone dripping with condescension. It's a classic move, the old guard, the entrenched authority, dismissing the new wave of progress as naive, reckless. He leans back in his chair, confident that he's delivered a crushing blow. The room is still, waiting for Crockett's response, waiting to see if she will crumble under the weight of his authority. But Crockett doesn't falter. She doesn't blink. Her gaze remains steady, locked onto Thomas, her posture unwavering. The silence stretches for a beat, and then she speaks. "You talk about fairness, Justice Thomas," she begins, her voice low but resolute. "But fairness has never been the reality for the millions of people who have been silenced by the very system you uphold. You speak of consistency, but tell me, where was the consistency when Black Americans were denied the right to vote for centuries? Where was the consistency when Jim Crow laws were allowed to stand? Where was the fairness when people were imprisoned for the color of their skin, when they were given sentences that far exceeded those of their white counterparts for the same crimes?" The room is stunned. The air crackles with the force of her words. Crockett is no longer just a politician in a room full of powerful men. She is the voice of the oppressed, the voice of every person who has been denied justice for too long. Her words ring true, cutting through the polished veneer of Thomas's legal arguments. She doesn't just speak to him, she speaks for the millions who have been left behind by the very system he has helped perpetuate. Thomas shifts in his seat, visibly rattled by the force of her counterattack. His confident composure begins to crack, his fists tightening in frustration. Crockett can feel it, she's starting to win this. She's starting to redefine the terms of the debate, and it's clear that Thomas doesn't know how to respond. But she's not done yet. "Let's talk about the system you claim to protect, Justice Thomas," she continues, her tone now sharp, cutting through the air like a blade. "You've spent your entire career defending a system that protects the rich, the powerful, and the privileged. You've supported decisions that strip away voting rights, that gut civil rights protections, that make it harder for marginalized communities to access justice. You've stood by, year after year, as the laws you champion have left people in the dust." The weight of her words hangs heavy in the air. Thomas, the man who has held the power to shape this nation's legal future for decades, has been put on the defensive. His confidence, once unshakable, is now crumbling. Crockett's voice remains steady, but the force of her argument is undeniable. She isn't just dismantling his positions, she's calling out his hypocrisy, his indifference to the suffering of those who have been marginalized by the very system he defends. "Let's be clear," Crockett says, her voice now rising with the passion she's held in check for so long. "You don't represent justice, Justice Thomas. You represent the status quo. You represent the system that has protected your power, your privilege, and your position for years. But you cannot continue to pretend that this system works for everyone, because it doesn't. You've made your decisions based on an ideology that ignores the very real, very human consequences of those decisions." The room falls silent. The power dynamics have shifted. What was once an argument about legal theory, about the interpretation of the law, is now a moral reckoning. Thomas is no longer in control of the narrative. Crockett has flipped the script, she's redefined the debate in a way that no one saw coming. The room, once a place of quiet reverence for Thomas's authority, is now a battleground. Her final words echo in the air like a challenge: "You may think you hold all the power, but you don't. The power belongs to the people. And the people are speaking, Justice Thomas. They're speaking with their voices, and they're speaking with their votes." There's a beat of stunned silence, and then the realization sets in. Thomas has been completely outmaneuvered. He sits there, frozen, unable to respond, his mouth slightly ajar. The audience is looking at him, waiting for him to fire back, to regain control. But it's over. Crockett's words have left him speechless. The cameras flash, capturing the moment as if it were a scene from a thriller. The man who has stood as the embodiment of the legal establishment for decades has been silenced by the sheer force of a rising political star. The implications of this moment are clear. Crockett has not only won the debate, she has reshaped the narrative. The tables have turned, and the room knows it. In the aftermath, the shockwaves reverberated across social media, and the world was left questioning everything. The moment Crockett delivered her devastating response, the room went silent. But the silence didn't last long. As the footage of her mic drop moment spread across news outlets and social media, the ripple effect was immediate and powerful. Within minutes, hashtags like #CrockettForJustice and #JusticeForThePeople began trending, flooding Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Millions of people were reacting, and the tone was overwhelmingly one of support for Crockett. The nation was waking up to the power of a new voice in politics, a voice that was unapologetically challenging the status quo. Pundits were scrambling to offer their take on the debate. Fox News, CNN, and MSNBC all pivoted to their political analysts, trying to dissect what had just happened. Some of them couldn't quite believe it. Crockett, a relative newcomer in the political world, had just done what few could ever hope to accomplish. She had made a seasoned, powerful figure like Clarence Thomas, a man who had shaped the course of American law for decades, freeze on the spot, unable to respond. It wasn't just the way she spoke, it was the content of her argument, grounded in deep knowledge, unflinching in its call for justice. For the first time in years, Thomas was forced to confront his own hypocrisy, and the media couldn't get enough of it. "I've never seen anything like this," one political commentator on MSNBC said, almost breathless. Justice Thomas, who has dominated this court for over 30 years, silenced by a first-term Congresswoman. This moment has shaken the entire political establishment. Meanwhile, on Twitter, the floodgates had opened. The mic drop moment had gone viral within minutes, shared by activists, politicians, and regular people alike. One tweet, shared by social justice leader Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, read, "This is what change looks like. This is what happens when young leaders rise up and speak truth to power. #CrockettForJustice #ChangeIsNow." Memes flooded social media, some playful, some more serious, all underscoring the monumental nature of Crockett's victory. One meme showed a frozen Thomas with the caption, "When your decades of power crumble in 5 minutes of truth." Another showed Crockett with the words, "The future of America just dropped the mic," accompanied by a picture of her standing tall, her confidence radiating through the screen. The reaction wasn't just limited to social media. Prominent celebrities joined the conversation, some in disbelief, others in celebration. Actor and activist Mark Ruffalo tweeted, "Incredible. This is a game changer. Justice Thomas has been called out by the people. By the future of America. #CrockettForJustice." Even Oprah Winfrey, whose support carries significant weight in American culture, tweeted, "What happened today was historic. This is what leadership looks like. #CrockettForJustice #RiseAbove." But the impact wasn't just felt on the left. Republican figures, though quieter in their praise, couldn't ignore the seismic shift Crockett had caused. Some were defensive, trying to downplay her victory, but others were clearly rattled by the new wave of young, progressive voices. Senator Ted Cruz, attempting to maintain his position, tweeted, "The left wants to rewrite the law to fit their agenda." Crockett's response today is proof that they have no regard for the long-standing principles that have kept this country stable. The real shockwaves, however, were felt within the conservative establishment. Justice Thomas, who had long been a stalwart defender of conservative legal principles, was now caught in a whirlwind he couldn't control. His allies on the bench were scrambling to defend him, but it was clear, the narrative was shifting. The nation was beginning to reassess his role in shaping American law. For the first time in decades, there was a serious public question about whether the system Thomas helped build was truly working for everyone, or if it was time for a change. Among those asking that question was Senator Elizabeth Warren, who tweeted, "Today's debate wasn't just about legal precedent, it was about whether or not our justice system works for the people." Crockett's words are a wake-up call for everyone who's been complacent for too long. Crockett's victory became more than just a political win. It was a moment of cultural awakening. The nation, already on the brink of major societal changes, had just seen the political future of America take shape before its eyes. The people who had felt silenced by the old guard, who had been told for years that their voices didn't matter, now had a new champion. Crockett wasn't just a congresswoman, she was a symbol, a beacon of hope for those who had been ignored, for those who had been fighting for change for generations. As the days passed, it became clear that Crockett's victory in that congressional hearing was the spark for a larger movement. Calls for reform grew louder, and the debate about who had the authority to define justice in America became a national conversation. Politicians, activists, and ordinary citizens were all talking about the same thing, the future of American democracy and whether it was time for a new vision. The old guard, represented by figures like Thomas, had been put on notice. Their time had come to an end, and the people were no longer willing to wait. As one activist wrote in a viral post, "Today, we saw the future of America, and it doesn't look like Clarence Thomas." But what came next was even more shocking than anyone could have imagined. The world had watched as Jasmine Crockett took on the might of one of the most powerful figures in American law, Justice Clarence Thomas, and emerged victorious. But Crockett's victory was more than just a personal triumph. It was a statement. A statement that no matter how entrenched the systems of power may seem, they can be challenged. A statement that justice is not just for the privileged few, but for everyone who has ever been told that their voices don't matter. In the days that followed the debate, Crockett's name continued to reverberate across the nation. Her words, clear, confident, and filled with undeniable truth, became a rallying cry for people who had been marginalized, for those who had never seen their struggles reflected in the halls of power. But it wasn't just her words that had the power to inspire. It was the courage she demonstrated when she stood face to face with someone who had long been considered untouchable. As the media storm around her continued to swell, Crockett sat down for an interview, reflecting on the moments that had led up to that defining exchange. When asked how it felt to stand up to Justice Thomas, she paused for a moment before speaking. "It wasn't about me," she said softly, her voice firm with conviction. "It was about every person who's ever been told they don't have the right to speak up. It was about every person who's been silenced by the powers that be. This wasn't just about one man, one judge. It was about the people who have fought for decades, for generations, for the justice they deserve. It was about making sure that we don't accept the world as it is, but fight for the world as it should be." Her words resonated deeply, not just with those who already supported her, but with people across the political spectrum. It was clear, this wasn't just a debate. This was a turning point. She continued, her eyes filled with quiet intensity. "We live in a world where the powerful think they can dictate the terms of justice. They think that if they stay quiet long enough, if they maintain their grip on the system, they can control the narrative. But the truth is, justice doesn't belong to the powerful. It doesn't belong to the ones who've held the reins of power for generations. Justice belongs to everyone, to every single person who stands up and says, 'This isn't right, and I'm not going to stand by and let it happen.'" The audience watching her interview, now scattered across screens and living rooms, was captivated. This was no ordinary politician speaking. This was a woman who had faced down one of the most intimidating figures in the country, and not only held her own but had changed the course of the conversation. "I know the odds are stacked against us," Crockett continued, her voice unwavering. "I know that we've been told, time and time again, that the system is too big, too broken, to fix. But I'm here to tell you that it's not too late. The system isn't set in stone. It's never too late to fight for what's right. The reason we're in the position we're in is because too many people were afraid to take that first step. But if you're waiting for the perfect moment, you're going to wait forever. The time to act is now." Her message was clear: standing up for justice required courage, resilience, and a belief that change was possible, even when the forces of power seemed insurmountable. And for those watching, especially young people, people of color, and those who had been pushed to the margins, Crockett's words were an invitation to join the fight. "This isn't about one person," she repeated. "This is about all of us. The real fight is about our future, the kind of world we want to live in, the kind of America we want to build. I don't want a country where only the rich, the powerful, the privileged get to decide what's just. I want a country where justice is for everyone." Her speech wasn't just a political statement, it was a call to action. And as it resonated through social media, her words began to spark something larger than just a moment of political theater. People began sharing her message, not just with their friends, but with their communities, with their neighbors. It became clear, Crockett had tapped into something much bigger. The people who had watched her stand up to the old guard saw in her the embodiment of their own struggles, their own hopes for a fairer, more just society. But as powerful as Crockett's words were, she knew that this was only the beginning. The real fight was far from over. She had won a battle, but the war for justice, for equality, for a system that truly represented the people, was still raging. And it would take more than one courageous voice to bring about the change this country desperately needed. And so, she concluded, her voice strong and clear, the real fight had just begun. What we witnessed today wasn't just a debate, it was a battle for the soul of our country. A powerful, entrenched system was called out, and the voice of the people was heard. Jasmine Crockett showed us what it looks like when courage meets conviction, when a leader rises up to challenge the status quo, not for personal gain, but for the people she serves. But this isn't just her victory. It's all of ours. It's a victory for anyone who's ever been told their voice doesn't matter. It's a victory for those fighting for justice, equality, and change. Crockett's words remind us that it's never too late to stand up for what's right, no matter how impossible the odds may seem. And now, it's time for you to take action. If you believe in justice, in truth, in the power of standing up to entrenched power, we need you. We need your voice, your energy, and your commitment to creating a better world. So, what can you do? Simple. Hit that subscribe button. Share this video with everyone who needs to hear this message. This movement is only just beginning, and we need you to be part of it. Share the truth. Spread the word. Together, we can keep pushing for change, keep pushing for a country that truly serves the people, not the powerful few. We've seen the change that one person can spark. Now, it's time to keep the flame burning. The fight for justice isn't over, it's only just begun. Together, we can change the world. Are you in?